Atlantis. Just saying the name brings up these incredible images, right? A city of wonders, a technological marvel, this perfect civilization just lost beneath the waves. It's a story that has absolutely captivated people for centuries.
We all have this picture in our heads of a magnificent city, unbelievably beautiful and wise, just hidden from us by the ocean, waiting for someone to find it. It really is the ultimate lost world, that grand what-if of human history. And that's the big question, isn't it? To even begin to answer that, we have to peel back all these layers of myth and speculation that have built up over hundreds of years. We've got to go right back to the beginning, to the one and only original source for the entire legend.
Okay, so let's get into it. The story of Atlantis doesn't come from some ancient scroll dug up by archaeologists or a mysterious lost text. Nope, it comes from one person, the Greek philosopher Plato. He wrote about it around 360 BC in a couple of his dialogues. That's it.
So, in his story, Plato describes this massive island empire way out past the Pillars of Hercules, which is what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. And we're not talking about some small city-state here. This was a naval superpower that controlled huge territories, a real powerhouse.
And this is where Plato sets up a really important contrast. See, he didn't describe Atlantis as a perfect utopia. For him, it was actually the villain of the story. It was a cautionary tale, a rich, advanced, but totally arrogant empire that he put up against a fictional, ancient version of Athens, which he saw as the ideal, small, fair, and pure. So here's the bottom line. Pretty much every scholar who studies this agrees that Plato made Atlantis up. It was a literary tool, an allegory that he created to warn his fellow Athenians about the dangers of imperial ambition and pride. He was using a made-up story to make a very real point about politics and morality.
For more than 2,000 years, most people got what Plato was doing. They understood it was a philosophical fable. But then something shifted in the 19th century, and this story started an unbelievable journey from allegory to a real lost continent. And this is where the whole thing just takes a wild turn. If Plato's story was mostly ignored or just seen as fiction for so long, what on earth sparked this global obsession with finding an actual physical place? Well, the answer is in a perfect storm of new discoveries and some creative new interpretations. As you can see, the myth was pretty much dormant for a huge stretch of time after Plato. But then in the late 1800s, a handful of key people basically resurrected the story and completely reinvented it for a new era. The guy who really kicked this all off was a former U.S. congressman named Ignatius Donnelly. In 1882, he published a book that totally reframed the whole thing. He argued Atlantis wasn't an allegory, it was a real historical place. The mother culture that all other ancient civilizations, from Egypt to the Maya, came from. His book was a massive bestseller, and he's pretty much known as the father of the modern Atlantis craze. After Donnelly, the myth just got even more fantastic. People like Helena Blavatsky and the psychic Edgar Cayce started weaving Atlantis into their own spiritual beliefs. And suddenly, the story included things like psychic giants, energy crystals, and even aliens, stuff Plato could have never, ever dreamed up. So with the idea of a real Atlantis now stuck in everyone's imagination, the floodgates just burst open. The question wasn't if Atlantis existed anymore, it was where. And that's when the worldwide hunt for a lost continent really began. And I mean, this search went global fast. People have seriously proposed locations all over the planet, from the Atlantic, where Plato originally suggested, all the way to Antarctica, Ireland, and the Caribbean. At this point, the whole idea had become completely unmoored from the original story. Now, out of all the theories, the most believable inspiration for Plato's story is probably something that happened right in his own neighborhood. The volcanic eruption on the island of Thera, which we now call Santorini, was one of the biggest in human history. It caused the total collapse of the amazing Minoan civilization on nearby Crete. It's totally possible that the memory of this real-life catastrophe, passed down over 1,000 years, gave Plato the seeds for his fictional tale of a great civilization being swallowed by the sea. So what we have is a philosophical story that got reborn as a fringe theory and has kicked off a global treasure hunt. But why? After everything, why does the story of Atlantis still have such an incredibly powerful grip on us? I think this says it all, really. The name Atlantis has gone from being a cautionary tale about greed to a global brand for luxury and fantasy.
We see it in movies, video games, and of course, these gigantic resorts that promise you a little taste of a lost, lavish paradise. It's a total flip from the original point.
This quote really brings it all back home. The Plato scholar Julia Annis is basically reminding us that the whole reason Plato told the story was to make us think about our own world, about power, justice, and greed. If we're just out there looking for treasure on the ocean floor, then we have completely and utterly missed the point. So in the end, maybe the search for Atlantis isn't really about finding a city at all. Maybe it's about something deeper inside us, a longing for a lost golden age, a hope that humanity was once greater than we are now, and maybe a wish that we could get back to that lost paradise. Real or not, the myth of Atlantis is like a mirror, reflecting our own hopes and fears right back at us.